Okay, we're going to get started again. Thank you for hanging in there. It's been a long day, but we're not done. The best is yet to come. I'm introducing now Susan Spicka. She has been advocating for fair school funding for over a decade, and she has seen all the different ways that our state legislature dances around the things that the public asks for. So we are really appreciative. She's a former teacher, she's an advocate, she is the executive director of Education Voters of PA. We've been following very closely their really influential work, although we're still trying to figure out who influences our state legislatures because we don't know, but we're going to figure this out sooner or later. And yeah, Susan's going to talk to us about a little bit about their adventures in legislative dysfunction. So thank you, Susan, for being with us.
Carol, and thanks to everybody who's here and for all of your work on changing the rules. I think that this case study and frustration about charter school funding reform illustrates that the work you're doing is incredibly and vitally important if we want to impact change. So this is one of my favorite props that I bring around with me. It is a picture of an op-ed written by a school board member from Harrisburg School District, Larry Feinberg, written in 2007, advocating for making cyber charter schools accountable. So I think when he wrote this op-ed, my children were 3 and 5 years old, and they are both now in college. So that is like how long this has been going on, and I think Larry's probably published some version of this op-ed for the past 15 years in various newspapers throughout the state. So we're going to talk about charter school funding reform, and what I wanted to do is just kind of give you an idea of how bonkers this is, so that we can all understand how dysfunctional Harrisburg is through this lens. So in 1997, the Pennsylvania legislature enacted the charter school law and allowed charter schools to come to Pennsylvania. So since that time, there have been virtually no reforms to this law. So this law, think about what life was like in 1997, think about all the progress we've made in the world. Nothing has changed with charter school funding or accountability in the Commonwealth. So why this matters is that charter schools are funded primarily through local tax dollars. There is no state subsidy that pays for charter school tuition bills. So a student goes to a charter school, the school district is responsible for paying that child's tuition bill. Last year, it was to the tune of $3 billion. So we talk about property taxes. One of the top drivers of property tax increases is charter school tuition bills because those come directly from school district payments. And when charter school tuition rates go up, property taxes have to go up to cover the difference. They're not based, charter school tuition rates are not based on the cost of actually educating the kids. They're based on a formula in state law, and there are two problems with charter school funding: cyber school funding and special ed funding. So we can tell that we have a really flawed funding system when we have seen that charter school enrollment has increased 28% since 2014-15, but charter school tuition costs have increased 79%. So there's a real mismatch between the enrollment and the cost. So when people say charter school tuition costs are only going up because enrollment's going up, that is just patently false. And we're going to just take a quick look at the special education funding issue with the charter school law. It seems complex, and it is complex, but it's actually, in a certain level, really simple. We have two different systems for funding special education in Pennsylvania. School districts are funded using a very rational system. They receive state funding based on the actual costs of the services that students with disabilities have. So there's a formula. There are 3 different levels of funding that school districts get from the state. Tier 1 are students who require minimal interventions. Those are students who maybe need a half an hour a week of speech therapy. Then we have Tier 2. They need a little bit more significant interventions. That's a much, much smaller group of students. They might need to be in a self-contained classroom. And then the Tier 3 students are the students, a very, very small number of students who need really extraordinary interventions in order to be able to be educated in the way that they need to learn. Meanwhile, charter schools, they're funded on a one-size-fits-all lump sum payment based on a weird calculation in state law that assumes 16% of every school district students are receiving special ed services. So like what that means, just in a nutshell, is that there is this huge incentive for charter schools to pick students who have low-cost special education needs, and there is a even bigger incentive for them to deny access to students who have higher cost needs, because the way the calculation in the state law works, they get a payment based on what the district spends, regardless of the actual needs of the child that they are educating. So if we have a student in a school district and it costs $15,000 to educate that student, school district spends $15,000 educating that student. At a charter school, because of the calculation in the law, the charter school gets $27,000 for that student. So if you have a student who needs a half an hour a week of speech therapy and you're a charter school, you get $27,000 for that student, you make a profit of $12,000 off of that student. And you can take that money and spend it however you want as a charter school. There is no, you don't give it back. You can spend it on advertising. You can spend it on CEO salaries. You can spend it sending kids to Dave & Buster's if you want. You can spend it on anything. Flip side, for students with disabilities, if you have a child who has greater needs, the money that you get from that payment, that tuition payment, is not enough to pay for the services that that student needs. So there is a real disincentive for charter schools to enroll those students. And we actually looked at the actual enrollments, and what we found was that charter schools are not enrolling the same percentage of students with the greater needs as school districts are. They are in fact enrolling a much, much smaller percentage of students who have the higher needs and a much higher percentage of students who have low-cost needs, ultimately meaning that they are reaping a very substantial profit off of students with disabilities while denying students with greater needs access to charter schools. So like amoral and also very expensive and a huge waste of taxpayer money. And then we're gonna go on to cyber charter school funding. Cyber charter schools educate students sitting in their homes. They send them a computer and they provide instruction online. They don't have to have buildings. They don't have to have janitors. They don't have to have custodians and maintenance workers and cafeteria workers. They don't have sports fields, but they get paid the same exact way that brick and mortar charter schools get paid. So we started looking into, Ed Voters started looking into how are they spending this money, because I was a parent and I would get flyers in the mail and I would see advertisements on the internet. And we did right to know requests, and we found that charter schools over a 2-year period spent $35 million on advertising. So that $35 million, those are your property tax dollars that you paid to your school district, thinking that you were investing in educating kids in your own community. Instead, these dollars got sent to cyber charter schools. Cyber charter schools then took those dollars and used them to pay for advertising. And then I think I probably gave away the answer, but here we have a question. Oops, I have it in the wrong order. Who said it? During the last few years, we've created a complete business ecosystem at the waterfront. This strategic purchase was the natural next step as we continue to expand our operations. Like, does that sound like a casino operator, a real estate developer, a manager of a sports arena, or a cyber charter CEO? And as I revealed by mistake, it was actually a cyber charter CEO. So Pennsylvania's largest cyber charter school, Commonwealth Charter Academy, has basically become a real estate development firm. They have bought Office Park in Malvern in southeastern PA. They bought the Macy's. They just bought a 2.3 acre piece of land in my town in Shippensburg, where they intend to build a family center that's going to have 214 parking spaces. Now, I can't imagine what a cyber charter school needs a building for that's going to have that many parking spaces, but they have 16 or 17 family centers. They bought a building in Erie. They're developing real estate all over the Commonwealth with our property tax dollars. And anytime anybody makes any kind of claim that we need to align the funding with their actual costs of educating students, they say, well, we would go out of business. We would have to cut services for students, but meanwhile, they can buy the Macy's. And then, this is the actual bottom line. We're spending $3 billion to send students to charter schools. $1 billion of that goes to cyber charter schools. And when we look at our cyber charter schools, they are the lowest performing schools in the state. So the red bar is the graduation rate for public schools, like traditional school districts. We can see that it's like 88%. Then we see all charter schools is next, average is about 69%. Brick and mortar charter schools, they average about 84% graduation, 4-year graduation rate, pretty much close to school districts. And then we look at cyber charter schools. We are spending $1 billion a year to send students to schools where nearly half of them will never graduate. So this is a waste of taxpayer dollars, but it is more importantly a waste of children's lives, because they are going into these schools and their parents believe that they are going to get a high quality education. And we see that after 4 years, nearly half of them will not have a diploma. And so what does that mean for those students in their lives? I think we all understand what it means to be a person trying to make it in this world without a high school diploma. We're spending $1 billion a year on that. So this is where all of this comes in, where the rules reform comes in. Year after year, I mean, for 15 years, superintendents and school board members, and to a certain extent, parents and advocacy groups have been begging the state legislature to reform the way that we pay for charter schools so that there is some kind of rational system for paying for them. So we saw this back, 2007. There was an effort. Then we saw a legislation that was introduced, House Bill 272. It had a lot of co-sponsors. It was broad, it was bipartisan. There were so many people who were supporting this bill, never got a vote, could never get brought up in the House Education Committee to have anybody even consider it. And these Governor Wolf has proposed every year, he proposed charter school reforms, would have saved $373 million by simply aligning the special ed formula with charter schools, so you weren't letting them reap a profit off kids, and then also just saying we need a flat rate tuition for cyber charter schools because it doesn't cost $27,000, $37,000, $47,000, $57,000 a year to have a kid sit at home on a computer and get an education. However, that bill didn't see the light of day, and I think what makes this like kind of the most galling experience, like as an advocate, is that we're up to 440 school districts in Pennsylvania that have passed a resolution in support of these funding reforms. If you tried to find any other issue in the Commonwealth that 440 school board members would 440 school district board members would agree on, like, you would never find it. These are Republican districts, Democratic districts, purple districts, small, large, urban, rural, across the board. These school board members are begging the legislature for help because they are raising property taxes every year and they can't get more resources into their schools because all of this money is just going out the door to charter schools. And even with this, the legislature has still stonewalled on any kind of charter school reform. So, I think as we look forward to this new legislative session, it will be a really interesting, we're going to see if we have a different party controlling the House. It will be interesting to see if we will then have a vote on charter school reform that will start to look at reforming these payments or not. I think there's a lot that goes into the power in Harrisburg and who has invested into protecting different powers that be. And we know that a guy named Jeffrey Yass has put a lot of money invested in both Democrats and Republicans to maintain the status quo, to privatize our public schools, to funnel as many dollars as possible out of taxpayers' pockets and into private interests. And we can see with cyber charter schools, not for the benefit of children. If the schools are only graduating half of these students, there's nothing beneficial about this for children. They need to focus their time and energy on educating kids and not on like buying up real estate and doing whatever else it is that they're doing with all of their funding. So it has been a long and hard road, and I'm so grateful that you are working on the rules, and I'm grateful for all of the advocacy that you do. And if you do happen to go in and talk to lawmakers, I hope that this will give you like a little bit more of like if you bring up charter school reform, you've got a little bit more ammunition in your pocket to do that. And so I should have said in the beginning, we're Education Voters of Pennsylvania. We are a small, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We were founded in 2007, and our goal is to kind of increase public awareness and engagement in issues around education so that we can get fair and equitable funding so all students have an opportunity to learn. And so, I'm grateful for what you're doing, and I thank you for being here. And if we get this changed, I think you can all give yourselves a big pat on the back. So let's have this be like the victory that we can all share in, and I'm hoping that that victory will come this year, but it's not going to come without a lot of pressure on lawmakers because these charter schools are making so much money, and they invest so much money into the status quo that it's a fight. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And I know some of you are thinking, wait, Fair Districts PA, we do redistricting reform, we do rules. We don't do school funding, right? What we want to say is that we are not advocating for this particular solution. We're saying, how is it that if 88% of our school boards are asking you to vote on a bill, you don't give the bill a vote? How is that possible? Is that what representation looks like? I don't think so. So this is one of our top examples. We've got many. We have many, many, many examples. But many of us came to this because of school funding. And this is one that we want to make sure that if you need an example to talk about, here's one. Because every single legislative district has school boards who have said, can you just give this bill a vote? And the committee chairs refuse. That's not acceptable. That's not what representation looks like. And so this is one example. We have others. Choose an example that resonates with you. There are many of bills that have broad bipartisan support from associations or from school boards or from commissions or from, you name it. There are many, but this is a particularly galling one. It's been going on a long time, and 88% of school boards are being ignored by our state legislators, and that has to change. So next we're going to hear from Drew Hart. Drew Hart is a professor at Messiah University in Grantham. He is a peace activist and has won awards for his work on that. He has been a youth pastor, so we have that in common. He's also been a pastor, and he is an organizer and has thought a lot about how do we speak across the divides. And I know some of our folks have thought, Christian nationalism is really troubling to us. What does that mean? How do we talk to faith communities when we're not even sure where people are coming from or what they're espousing or where we go with this conversation? And if we're going to talk in all parts of Pennsylvania, we need to figure out how to talk to people who might be coming from a different direction than we are, and that's something that Drew has done a lot of thinking about. So I've been reading his book. He's got some books for sale out there. I've been reading his book called Who Will Be a Witness, which kind of goes back into the civil rights history, but brings it very contemporary and very Pennsylvania. And I've been finding lots to resonate on, lots to brew on, lots to think about. So his book is out there, but he is here, and we really appreciate that Drew Hart is going to speak to us a little bit about why this work matters so much and some ideas for how to continue with it. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to be here and to just take in all the good work that you all are doing. I'm not going to give you a lot of information. You already have been informed quite a bit, but I do want to encourage us, maybe challenge us, invite us to think about the kind of coalitions that we can be working towards, and hopefully have a shared vision for the kind of society that we seek to build together. I like to think about imagination and the kind of imagination that drives us. And I'm from Philly, and when I was in middle school, we took a field trip, and they took us to a mall, and at that mall we had lunch at the food court, and then they kind of let us loose for a little bit to kind of like explore, but they had us paired off. And so I went off and it was a bunch of middle school boys let loose in the mall. And so we're walking through the mall and we come upon an escalator. And of course, like, what else were we gonna do, right? When we saw this escalator, other than to go up the escalator the wrong way. I mean, we didn't really have a choice because we were unsupervised middle school boys. And so we went up this escalator the wrong way, and we learned a few things really quickly as we were going up the wrong way. The first thing that we realized is that there's gonna take some intentionality, right? There's gonna take some deliberateness about the kind of work that we're trying to get from one floor to the next. And so we had to kind of strive and be deliberate and kind of keep moving forward. It wasn't just a little cakewalk. We also realized that there are people sometimes going in the opposite direction. Not everyone is moving in the direction that we're moving in, and so we're kind of navigating other folks in the other way that they're moving as we're trying to get up this escalator. We realized that there wasn't really any true opting out, right? Like you could try to like time out while you're on the escalator, but the escalator is still moving. And so even if you want to take a break, the inertia is still there. And so you've got to be aware of the fact that there really isn't any actual opting out of what's happening all around you. And you got to kind of just keep moving forward. And so we realized that we had to just kind of set our eyes on that next floor and keep moving forward. And so for me, when I think about the kind of work that we are all committed to, it reminds me of me as a middle school boy learning for the first time how to go up that escalator the wrong way, right? That it is going to take ongoing intentionality and deliberateness in the kind of work that we're doing. It is going to require that we're going to have to navigate even folks and forces at work, some of it from histories that go way beyond when we were born, that are shaping the inertia of the environment that we're in, and we're gonna have to navigate those things. That there is no opting out, right? That we are all responsible for our neighbors, that we are all responsible for the way that we are participating in our society, contributing to it, complicit in it, and hopefully leaving it better as we leave it than as we found it, right? And ultimately, I'm influenced by Dr. King, and he would often use the language of beloved community. And I think that as we kind of set our goals, if that second floor is beloved community, a place where everyone belongs, where everyone can thrive, and where every voice matters, then how do we set our eyes towards that and keep moving forward? This is long haul work, right, that we're all a part of. I believe that even though we have different kind of work that we're involved in, we're all here in some way or form because we're working towards a society again where everyone belongs, where everyone can thrive, and where everyone's voice matters. We're here because we seek justice for the most vulnerable and want to strengthen our democracy. We're here because we know this kind of beloved community will require that we link arms with one another, because we can't make these changes on our own. Again, this isn't Lone Ranger work, right? This is collective work that we must do together. The Black National Anthem, written by James Weldon Johnson, starts with the prose, "Lift every voice and sing." And if we're going to strengthen our democracy, then our ethics must also commit to lifting every voice. At a time when voting rights are being attacked and undermined, I say lift every voice. When partisan efforts are still gerrymandering voting districts to suppress the vote, I say lift every voice. When far-right leaders conspire to undermine fair election results and try to take our government when they lose, I say lift every voice. To undocumented immigrants unsafe in their communities, to those working in for unlivable wages, to the LGBTQ community whose identity or who they love is being attacked, to those without health care, to those who are harassed by police, and those who just desire adequate housing, education, or jobs, I say lift every voice. But lifting every voice also means building coalitions that take us out of our silos and require fusions grounded in a shared vision where, again, everyone belongs, where everyone can thrive, and where every voice matters. And I want to suggest that deepening our democracy in a pluralistic society includes organizing even faith communities and dialoguing within shared morals, convictions, and wisdom of various traditions. There are a lot of reasons why you might want to consider expanding your organizing efforts to include engaging faith leaders and communities. I mean, think about it. Faith communities are already organized groups, so when you engage them in organizing efforts, you are maximizing your efforts. Most faith communities are intergenerational and provide a range of different skills, availability, and energy. And despite how some people practice their faith, most sacred scriptures and traditions emphasize the dignity of each person, the importance of caring for your neighbor, and doing justice for the most vulnerable. And even as the religious landscape continues to morph and change, the United States continues overall to be a very religious nation. In fact, even new immigrants coming over tend to be highly religious. And so taking faith communities seriously towards the practice of a fusion political movement, I believe, is vital. Lifting every voice should include coalitions with faith communities as we seek to a society where everyone belongs, where everyone can thrive, and where every voice matters. Of course, though, there are reasons why you might be skeptical of seeking such a fusion political movement, right? I know, as I'm a committed follower of Jesus, and I'm acutely aware of how Christianity in particular has been wielded as an ideological weapon to bolster injustice and the status quo in the public square. In fact, there's a book by Robert Jones. He wrote the book White Too Long, and there he exposes how embedded racist views are within the majority of white Christians in the United States, based on research. Based on his self-responses in PRRI surveys and research, Jones revealed that being white and Christian as a combination revealed an increase in racist views compared to white and non-Christian. To be white and Christian was the only combination where there was a consistent increase in racist views on a variety of subjects relating to Black communities, Latinx communities, and Muslim communities. And that wasn't only true of white evangelicals, which sometimes we get focused on in the media, but also found it to be true for white mainline Christians and white Catholic Christians. To make the point plain, Jones says this, that means if someone wanted to recruit for a hate group, they've got better odds going to the church parking lot than the local coffee shop on a Sunday morning, right? In 2020, where many are familiar, about 85% of white evangelicals who self-describe themselves as regular attenders of worship services supported Donald Trump, and that was 51% for white mainliners and 63% for white Catholics. There is a centuries-long history of some co-religionists co-opting their traditions to justify and bolster oppression, exploitation, and inequities. So if that's the case, you might ask, why in the world would I suggest that a fusion political movement, including faith communities, is important? Well, first of all, as a whole, we must also remember that at the same time, 40% of regular religious attendees voted against Trump and the MAGA movement in 2020. Faith communities are not monolithic. There are a lot of faith communities, and many of them, because of their religious convictions, rejected and resisted white Christian nationalism and anti-democratic policies, and were committed to pursuing a more just society. For example, 91% of Black Protestants, again, voted against such a vision in 2020. While Black churches themselves also exist on a broad spectrum, and I could talk about that, there's a long tradition of diverging from mainstream American views, and the Black church has produced innumerable justice leaders in this nation that have changed the course of this country. In the book, There Is a River, Vincent Harding, the Black scholar, civil rights activist, and friend of Dr. King, and briefly a mentor of mine before he passed away, wrote about Black resistance to oppression from the shores of Africa until the end of the Civil War. He argued that there was a long-flowing river of resistance and struggle. It was a centuries-long struggle. He described that sometimes the river was rushing and flowing, and other times it was a slow trickle, but either way, it always was there, and that the human spirit sparked a desire for liberation and justice. The Black radical tradition and the Black prophetic church tradition are both children of this long-flowing river. Faith traditions in the United States are not homogeneous, and many are committed to a society where everyone belongs, where everyone can thrive, and where every voice matters. I know I can talk about this personally because of the work that I'm doing. I'm a director for a program called Thriving Together Congregations for Racial Justice. We had the opportunity to get a pretty large grant and to direct it towards organizing congregations to address racial justice issues right here in the Harrisburg region. And what we found was they had to actually apply, and we had 30 congregations apply, even though we only had 12 spots. And so we had congregations across the spectrum: Episcopalians, Presbyterians, AME Zion, Black Baptist, United Methodist, Brethren in Christ, Church of the Bride, a whole range of congregations of Christian communities in particular, who wanted to participate in a 2-year commitment of learning and growing about the history of injustice in our community, of learning about how to mobilize and organize on the ground within their communities. And we're going to be doing a whole nother cycle, and there's already energy and questions about how congregations can get involved. So there are churches just in our little area in the Harrisburg region on each side of the shore. There are churches that want to get involved in good work for the betterment of our communities. I've also participated in multi-faith organizing, particularly with Power Interfaith. I know some of you guys from the Philly region know Power Interfaith very well, and I've gotten to participate on public education funding. That's a big issue for Power Interfaith. They're working on that across the state, as well as in fact, just right before the election on November 4th here in Harrisburg, we gathered faith leaders, many of them who had never been engaged in the public square on any kind of civil work in that kind of way, were out speaking out against white Christian nationalism, strengthening of democracy, naming the Commonwealth Foundation, someone mentioned Jeffrey Yass, and doing that kind of work. And so inviting them to have a moral voice in the public square about these issues that most impact their communities. I've even experienced this kind of openness within MILPA here in Harrisburg, who works with undocumented communities. MILPA is not a formally or explicitly faith-based organization, but nonetheless, they organically create space for faith coalitions organically as part of their grassroots work. And so when I show up just to support their work, usually they say, hey, Reverend, or hey, Pastor, can you say a prayer as a part of this, right? Because they want to have a faith component, because they recognize the communities that they are serving. Many of the folks there are people of faith, and that's what motivates them. And so there's a whole variety of ways I've seen these coalitions form and build on the ground. Of course, we don't only need multi-faith coalitions, but multiracial coalitions as well. White supremacy continues to be a dominant organizing principle for our society, and it will take everyone understanding their own social location and participation within our society to dismantle and transform it so we can inch ever closer to beloved community throughout our society. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I don't know if you guys remember a few years ago, Paula Deen was in the news quite a bit, right? Paula Deen was in the news. It was several years ago, and it was she was in the news because it came out that she wanted like this plantation-style wedding with black people serving, and that she had said the N-word, and all these things were a part of it. And then she did her strange like celebrity like apology with like a black person behind. It was just awkward, right? And what I remember about the moment, though, is that across the board, like, everybody was like, respond, bad Paula Deen, how terrible, how ugly, right? And because it was just kind of really ugly to hear these things in the public square and the way, and so like across the board, there was like this kind of brief moment of unity where everyone could kind of wag their finger at Paula Deen, shame, 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 bad, 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 right? And so I was thinking about it, and I was paying attention to how people were responding. And at first I was getting involved too, right? Bad Paula Deen, shame, shame, how racist, how terrible. Then after a while, I had to pause and think about it for a little bit. I said, something just doesn't seem right about this moment. How is it that everybody and their mama are pointing the finger and wagging their finger at Paula Deen, right? Something just doesn't seem quite right about that. And so I thought about it for a little bit, and I thought, did Paula Deen like invent racism? Like, is she like personally responsible? Was she like a mad scientist in a lab somewhere cooking it up and, contaminating our waters with racism, originating it? No, of course not, right? Paula Deen is not the originator of racism. And if she's not the originator of it, then how do we understand Paula Deen and where these views come from, right? Well, all you have to do is, I would say just read a history book these days. It's getting harder and harder to find one with the truth. But But all you have to do is learn about American history, and then you understand very easily how Paula Deen came about these ideas, right? She didn't originate it. She was socialized into it, right? She was a child and a byproduct of a nation that had centuries of white supremacist history, and she was a part of a community that taught and where it was caught, right? And so if we understand that, then it changes a little bit about how we show up in our society and engage when we're thinking about race and racism in our society today, right? Because if she's taught by society itself, then we all have to navigate and be responsible for the ways that we participate in our society. What are the ways that we are showing up? Are we just going along with it? Are we resisting it, right? Are we apathetic and quiet in the midst of it? We all, instead of scapegoating the bad racists, we all need to take account for the ways that we actually participate in our society to actually subvert and undermine and transform our society from its white supremacist history. And if that's the case, then we begin to realize that the goal is not to just scapegoat the bad racists, right? Because in some ways that allows an out for us to not take seriously our own lives. And in fact, you could argue that maybe Paula Deen's biggest mistake was not that she said something racist, but that it was old school racism, right? She expressed ideas that were racist for that were mid-20th century racism, and she didn't update her racism card to more colorblind 21st century racism for today. But most of the greatest concerns that we are facing across the board are exacerbated when you look at it through the lens and impact of white supremacy and anti-blackness. And so we need to take these matters seriously, building multiracial coalitions that address these issues and invite us into deeper beloved community. And then we need to be practicing and strengthening democracy. Again, the force of white Christian nationalism and the MAGA vision and their current popularity are grounded in fear of ongoing change, loss of power, nostalgia for American exceptionalist myths. But we're also facing political partisanship that isn't only a result of people who aren't engaged in good faith dialogue and those who are blatantly desiring to uphold the status quo, right? We're also facing social algorithms that aid in constructing alternative universes and alternate interpretations of what's going on in our society. These algorithms take people down rabbit holes deeper and deeper and make us all susceptible to conspiracy theories, confirmation bias, and straw man arguments. Be honest, I don't have any great solutions to this current reality, but I know that we must lean further into information literacy, critical analysis, including our own biases, and understanding that actual people are much more complex than the one-dimensional characters that we often have construed others to be. In one-on-ones with those who are different from us, it's going to require deeper and more attentive dialogue practices. That we have to actually learn how to listen well, right? Attentive and deep listening, where we're not just speaking, but giving, receiving, and sharing, and sitting before other people's stories, allowing their lived experiences to impact us, to see the full person behind maybe the stereotypes that we expect them to be. But it also requires that we learn how to speak truthfully, too. I often talk about changing the temperature in the room, right? That we've got to kind of develop the art of knowing how to speak up and when. You think about a thermostat, right? Sometimes you can adjust the thermostat to get people comfortable. You can get people cold. You can warm people up, and people's mood might change, right? Depending on how you adjust the temperature in the room. And the same thing is true with our own words and how we speak. And we have to kind of be wise about how we show up and intervene. Sometimes we just need a simple, I disagree, right? And it just needs to be said. Someone needs to speak up and say, I disagree, or that's not right. Other times, we need to lower the temperature so that people are going to have actual meaningful conversation with one another. But sometimes it's necessary that we turn up the temperature too, right? Because the stakes and the urgency is high, and we need to make sure that the message that we are trying to share is heard. And so we've got to have practices around speaking the truth appropriately. Imagine that we were in a room where there was one big table and we were meeting weekly. And week after week, I came and I stood on the center of the table and everybody else sat around the table, right? And that's just how we met. Week after week, I stood on the table right at the center and everyone else sat around it. And then eventually, after maybe a few weeks, Carol's like, hey, Drew, can you like get off the table and like sit around the table with everyone else, right? Now, I might respond a few different ways because I probably don't like the fact that I'm being focused on at this moment. And so I might respond this way. I might say, I don't know why you guys are picking on me, right? I think I've been stewarding my position and my privilege really well and trying to be benevolent with the kind of central position so that we can really have a really great space. And I don't know why you guys are marginalizing me in this moment, right? And hopefully somebody else around the table would say, Drew, you're not being marginalized, you're just being decentralized, right? Right? So that there's a difference between marginalization and decentralization. And a part of speaking the truth, especially right now, because things are changing, right? Our society is going through real, actual changes, and it is actually disorienting. It's disorienting for everyone, and including those that have been accustomed to being at the center of everything. And so when we actually begin to make these changes, and someone says, stop marginalizing me, we have to also be able to tell a truthful narrative of what's actually happening. It doesn't mean that we have to ignore the disorientation people are experiencing, but we also must prioritize ongoing change that doesn't diminish the lived experiences of those who've been undergoing these marginalizations and exclusions for centuries. And so we have the work of actually speaking truthfully and telling a more truthful narration of what's happening around us in our society. We should be centering the lived experiences and perspectives of those that have been most affected by the interlocking systems of oppression in our society. And all of that is a part of speaking truthfully. Again, changing the room, the temperature of the room, more truthful narration of what's happening as we change, and centering the lived experiences and perspectives of others. And so with all of that in mind, though, the fact of the matter is that, as we talked about the frustrations around, the charter schools and funding, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, right? A lot of great work is being done. It's actually always encouraging for me to be in the room with other folks who are just collaborating. It's good to remember that sometimes when you're in your little silos, you forget all the good work that's happening all around the place. But we've got to be in it for the long haul, and we've got to have a sense of where we're going and what we're trying to achieve. Through many people groups and traditions around the world, we're reminded that our lives are intertwined with others. Our present and future lives are intimately interdependent with others. Our liberation is bound up together. The indigenous of Turtle Island call it the Harmony Way. In South Africa, it's called Ubuntu. In the Hebrew scriptures, it's a vision of shalom. And Dr. King often used the language of beloved community. And this is what I mean when I say a society where everyone belongs, where everyone can thrive, and where every voice matters. If we're going to pursue justice and deepen democracy over the long haul, we will need to transform our social imaginations about the nature of our intergenerational work, as well as the vision for the character of community we seek after. Another world is possible. The work that you all do is indispensable. And if, denying the dignity of others and increasing other people's suffering is inhumane, then being fully human is tied to compassion for the most vulnerable, to action that leads to more justice and inclusion, and solidarity with others that keeps its eyes on the beloved community. And so when I started off with this metaphor of going up the escalator the wrong way, it really is a vision for us to remember that this escalator ride is actually an intergenerational one, right? That we too are joining in this river and that we are stepping into the waters and participating in a centuries-long struggle for a more just and inclusive society. I'm going to wrap up with a story. In 1963, Dr. King found himself a part of a movement in Birmingham, Alabama. And one of the things that they found as they were working on what they call Project C, which was for confrontation, they wanted to actually confront and disrupt the systems of injustice because Birmingham was known as one of the most deeply segregated cities in the South. And so as they were going about their work, they began to realize that they were being confronted with a lot of challenges and obstacles, much more than they had anticipated. And in fact, in one particular occasion, they had a bunch of things not going their way. They were about to do a march, and they got an injunction put against them so that they could not march. Furthermore, they had run out of bail funds. And so, not too many people were excited about going to jail in Birmingham, of all places, if you didn't have bail funds. And furthermore, Passover and Easter weekend was right around the corner, and most of the leaders were, clergy, right? And so they had this issue about what were they going to do. And so they got together in Dr. King's hotel room. If you can imagine one of those hotel rooms that have like a bedroom door and then like a separate living space, right? That's how they're all kind of gathered in that living room space in the hotel. I'm not sure exactly how many, but I think it was probably about 10 leaders there, and they're all debating and arguing about what they should do next. Some of them are saying we should just move forward, we've got to just keep moving ahead, and we will accept the consequences and go to jail and we'll see what happens, right? Others were saying, look, let's put this thing on a pause, let's send Dr. King out, let him do some fundraising, he can fundraise like nobody else can, and if he can, we can revive this movement after we've got the bail funds kind of back in place. Others were saying, look, Passover and Easter is like the most important holidays in our tradition. We've got to be present with our own congregations. We can't be away. We've got to get back home, many of them living in very different places all around the state and sometimes country. And as they're all debating and arguing what they should do, the whole entire time, Dr. King is just sitting there and he is quiet. He's not saying anything at all. He's just listening. And so they're bickering and going back and forth about what they should do. If there was 10 of them, there were probably 11 different views about what they should do. And then suddenly Dr. King gets up and goes into the bedroom and closes the door and leaves them by themselves. You've seen images of Dr. King often dressed up with a kind of black suit, right? Kind of clean-cut look, right? Well, he goes in, minutes go by, suddenly the door opens up and Dr. King has come out, but Dr. King has changed his clothes. Dr. King is now wearing blue jeans and a blue work shirt. And the moment everyone saw him, everybody knew exactly what that meant, right? They weren't going to the fancy Easter services and getting all dressed up to celebrate, right, their traditions. They were going to embody the best of it, right, in the grounds, in the public square, on behalf of their neighbors, especially on behalf of those that were disproportionately suffering in their society. And I guess, I came by just to encourage you all that it's time for us to continue to put on our blue jeans, right? Let's put on our blue jeans for justice. Let's put on our blue jeans to deepen our democracy. Let's put on our blue jeans for those that have been marginalized, for those that are most vulnerable, for those that disproportionately suffer, right? In my tradition, we talk about letting justice roll down like waters and righteousness like ever-flowing streams. And it's an invitation for us to be committed to a society where everyone belongs, where everyone can thrive, and where every voice matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. People sometimes say, how do we keep going with this? And I think it's really important for us to remember why we do this. The kids who are in schools without libraries, the people who are incarcerated because they didn't have a public defender, the firefighters who are exhausted and know if they quit, there's not going to be a firefighter in their community, the towns that are getting boarded up because there is no broadband. Whatever that thing is, the place where shalom has been broken, where the beloved community is missing, we need to hold those visions in our in our minds, because there are days when we get discouraged. There are days when we get tired. There are days I think I would rather be out kayaking or bird watching than doing this work. And then I remember the people who don't have that choice. And we need to hold those people close. So thank you, Drew. Thank you for that. And thank you all for being here. Thank you all for caring. Thank you for the work that you do, the creativity you bring, the relationships that you lean into to find ways to bring other people along in this work. Thank you for that. Thank you for taking postcards home with you. There are still lots of rack cards. Grab some rack cards and think about where you could put them, a coffee shop, a library. Where are you going to put those things? There are also a bunch of yard signs. I am not allowed to bring yard signs. My husband is very patient and very supportive, but he does not want any more yard signs in our garage. Thank you. Take some. And January 3rd, we will be gathering in Harrisburg to say we demand a legislature that represents us. We demand rules that allow our legislators to represent us. We don't know when the vote will be. We are planning to be in Harrisburg on January 3rd on the Capitol steps. We have two friends here who made these beautiful banners, Nancy and her husband Larry. We will have these banners with us on January 3rd. We want to have as many different folks from as many different organizations wearing as many different t-shirts and hats as we can on the Capitol steps saying, we want to be represented, we want to fix Harrisburg. We're asking our legislators to help make that happen.